is a complicated human endeavor. Unsurprisingly, the legal rules surrounding speech are kind of complicated too. You might think of at least three kinds of questions that arise. One is, when is speech unprotected just because it's so dangerous or so harmful? Here's a classic example. True threats of violence. Somebody comes up to you in a dark alley, says your money or your life. Let's say they don't even take your money. They don't even show you a gun. They just say that. Well, that's not protected by the First Amendment. That's a true threat of violence or a true threat of illegal conduct. Is constitutionally unprotected. Another famous example is defamation, which is generally speaking, knowingly false statements about particular people that damage their reputations. So if somebody says Eugene Volokh is an embezzler, well, especially if they know that's not true, and I assure you it's not true, then I could sue them for slander if they say it orally, libel if they say it in writing. So those are a couple of examples. Child pornography is another example. And there are some others as well. Those are pretty narrow exceptions. Generally speaking, speech is protected unless it falls within one of those narrow exceptions. For example, there's no exception for so-called hate speech. You can express whatever views you want, including about race, religion, sex, sexual orientation. Those are protected by the First Amendment. There's no exception for them. A second thing that sometimes comes up is when speech is restricted, not because of its content, not because of what it says, but because of other features. So let's say, for example, there's a law that says you can't use loudspeakers in residential neighborhoods at night. Well, does that restrict speech? Yes. If I want to have a big demonstration at midnight in a residential neighborhood using loudspeakers, I'm not allowed to do that. But though, generally speaking, a lot of those kinds of so-called content neutral restrictions are constitutionally permissible. Another example might be you can demonstrate in front of a building if there may be 10, 20, 30 of you, but if you want to have a demonstration of 1,000 people, you might need a permit, especially if you want to have it on a street, because after all, streets are usually taken up by traffic. So that's an example of where you could have speech restrictions when they're content neutral, although again, the rules there are a little complicated. And the third category of restrictions that are often permissible is when the government is acting in special capacities. Like, for example, as an educator in kindergarten through 12th grade schools, there are certain kinds of restrictions the government can impose on students in school on pain of being maybe expelled or suspended or whatever else, that it can't impose on the rest of us on pain of being thrown in prison. Likewise, the government as employer can impose restrictions on its employees in some measure, especially when it just says, look, if you say certain things, then we'll stop paying you. The government as property owner has some extra rights over its property that it may not have over the property of the rest of us. So those are three kinds of elements of free speech law. You might think of it as the grammar of free speech law. Just as there are parts of speech into which we divide words, there are particular kinds of restrictions that we might identify this way. So as a result, not all speech is protected all the time in all circumstances against all laws. This having been said, the speech protection we enjoy under American law really is very broad.